Pregnant wife. Waited alone in the hospital, the millionaire was out with his mistress. Lightning cracked across the sky as Christine Harrington, heavily pregnant and trembling from contractions, sat alone on a stiff hospital bench. Each flash of pain reminded her that her husband, Michael Harrington, prominent millionaire and charismatic business tycoon, was nowhere in sight. Instead, rumors whispered that he was out on the town with a stunning young woman, far from Christine's hospital room. Confusion, heartbreak, and desperation churned in her mind. Would he ever appear at her side, or had he chosen another path entirely? She could feel the seconds ticking away, each one louder than the last, in an endless night of uncertainty. Christine Harrington's life had once resembled a glossy magazine spread. Born to a middle-class family in North Carolina, she had grown up with humble dreams, a comfortable home, a loving spouse, and a steady routine. Those dreams took an extravagant turn when she met Michael Harrington, whose family name carried an almost legendary weight in the business world. He swept Christine off her feet one crisp evening at a charity gala where she'd been volunteering to hand out programs. Michael, with his confident posture and magnetic gaze, lingered by the punch bowl until he caught her eye. Their conversation flowed, laughter mingling easily with the soft notes of the string quartet in the background. In the early months of their courtship, Christine was dazzled by Michael's passion, generosity, and his relentless determination to create the perfect life for them. He financed romantic getaways, showered her with exotic gifts, and seemed genuinely interested in her dreams. Indeed, he promised they would someday achieve far more than she had ever dared to imagine. Yet even then, Christine sensed small cracks in his polished exterior. His phone calls were abrupt and secretive, his nights ended later than expected. And though his business demands sounded legitimate, meetings with clients, urgent negotiations, last minute flights, Christine's intuition whispered that something was off. She was inexperienced in the realm of high-stakes finance and insisted on trusting him. His words were sweet, after all, and his glimmering vision for their future together was irresistible. Still, she had never anticipated the changes that came once they were married. The Harrington name was powerful. Christine quickly found that both a privilege and a burden. She experienced special treatment in restaurants, hotels, and stores, but she also encountered prying eyes, rumor-mongers, and gossip columnists. Clandestine photographers snapped pictures of her strolling in the park or buying groceries. She had never yearned for that spotlight, and at times it pressed on her heart like an invisible weight, making her uneasy. While Christine longed for a peaceful life of love and mutual respect, Michael's ambitions soared higher with every success. He launched new companies, diversified investments, and traveled constantly. The more money he made, the more frantic his schedule became. Their evenings together became fewer, and their intimacy vanished behind an invisible glass wall he built between them. She reasoned that perhaps marriage was just challenging at this stage, reassuring herself with the hope that a new baby might bring them closer. So, on the evening she discovered she was pregnant, Christine assumed it was a turning point, a tangible sign that they were about to grow stronger as a couple. For a while, Michael did seem thrilled. He boasted about fatherhood to his colleagues, hired the best interior designer to transform a guest suite into a cozy nursery, and insisted on the best medical care. Yet soon Christine noticed his enthusiasm was often overshadowed by phone calls he had to take in another room. He went out at odd hours, claiming to finalize business deals that simply couldn't wait. And thus, the stage was set for the drama that unfurled the night Christine went into labor. Christine had been feeling contractions for a day or so, but they were mild and intermittent, typical for someone nearing her due date. She was at home alone that night. Michael had texted her in the morning, claiming he was in a crucial meeting with new investors from Singapore. Exhausted by the constant swirl of half-truths and suspicious business dinners, she forced herself to dismiss the creeping doubt in her heart. She knew she had to focus on her baby. At around 8 p.m., the mild contractions escalated sharply. Christine could hardly breathe through the surges of pain. She swallowed her pride and called Michael repeatedly, hoping he would pick up and rush home. But every call went to voicemail. She texted him, her messages growing frantic as she typed, "I think the baby's coming. Please hurry." No response. Her cheeks flushed with hurt, but she knew she couldn't hesitate. She grabbed the suitcase she'd packed weeks ago with essentials for labor and postpartum recovery. Then she dialed for a taxi. The world outside was engulfed in storm clouds and rolling thunder, suiting her tangled emotions. She arrived at the hospital alone, her steps unsteady yet determined. Nurses hurried to help her, guiding her to the labor ward. They placed her in a bed and prepared for immediate observation, hooking her up to monitors and offering words of comfort. Christine tried to maintain composure, but in the recesses of her mind, despair began to bloom. At first, she told herself Michael was simply stuck in traffic, or maybe his phone battery had died. But as minutes bled into hours, Christine's self-reassurances withered. The pain between contractions kept intensifying, requiring more focused breathing and occasional moans. Concerned nurses asked about her husband, and Christine could only offer an apologetic shrug, lying that he was on his way. On the inside, she felt both abandoned and furious. How dare he leave her alone at a time like this? Throughout the night, Christine discovered she wasn't just battling labor pains, she was battling fear, heartbreak, and a growing sense that she deserved better. Each wave of pain was a stark reminder that her dream of a supportive marriage might have been an illusion. The husband, a man she had pinned all her hopes on, was out of reach. She clung to the rails of the hospital bed, focusing on a single thought: please let my baby be safe. While Christine labored alone, Michael Harrington sat in a dimly lit booth in one of the city's trendiest nightclubs. Coils of cigarette smoke and neon lights wove around him. The air smelled of expensive cologne and top-shelf liquor. Seated next to him was Valentina Rousseau, a striking woman with sleek black hair, perfectly manicured nails, and designer heels that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Valentina was a rising social media influencer who, for the past 6 months, had been Michael's not-so-secret mistress. Michael was no longer the bashful man who'd proposed to Christine by candlelight. He was bold, brash, and fully intoxicated with both power and alcohol. He'd neglected to check his phone, where Christine's frantic calls and messages waited. If he had, he might have known he was about to become a father that very night. But his mind was elsewhere, lost in the adoration Valentina showered upon him, the rush of living a double life without immediate consequences. Only recently had his close friend, Eric Manning, begun to question the morality of what Michael was doing. Eric had known Michael since college, back when Michael was merely an ambitious finance major. That evening, Eric found Michael hunched over an exclusive VIP table, whispering into Valentina's ear. Despite the ear-splitting music, Eric tried to confront Michael. "Don't you think Christine's at home waiting for you? She's due any day." Michael shrugged him off. "She's fine," he said, voice tinged with irritation. "She has her mother's support. The doctors are on call. Everything's under control. I'm just finishing some business here." Eric's eyes darted to Valentina, who was sipping a glass of champagne, feigning a bored expression. "Business?" he asked in disbelief. "That's a convenient excuse. I don't recall your father teaching you to handle your responsibilities this way." Michael glared, his pride wounded at the mention of his father. "He taught me to provide everything my wife could ever need. She's not lacking for anything." "Just let it go, Eric." Eric stared, realization sinking in that Michael had changed irrevocably. His fortune had twisted him into someone unrecognizable, a man who placed fleeting pleasures and grandiose ambitions over his marriage and unborn child. In that moment, Eric knew that any attempt at reason would fall on deaf ears. He decided to leave, throwing one last pleading look at Michael's phone on the table. By the time Michael noticed the half-dozen missed calls from Christine, he was outside the club, caught in the glare of paparazzi flashbulbs. Valentina tugged at his sleeve, complaining about a headache, requesting they go somewhere private. Torn between fear and annoyance, he finally checked his phone. A jolt of shock coursed through him as he read, "I'm in labor. Where are you? Please come soon." Michael's heart pounded. In a flurry of confusion, he stepped away from Valentina and told her he had an emergency. She looked at him blankly, frustration lurking behind her carefully made-up eyes. But Michael wasn't about to risk losing everything by ignoring Christine's call. At least, that's what he told himself. He dashed to the street, searching for his car. A swirl of raindrops pelted his expensive suit, soaking through as thunder roared overhead. Guilt mingled with panic. Had he just jeopardized the most important moment of his life? While Christine gripped the sides of her hospital bed, the Harrington family was in uproar, unbeknownst to her. Michael's mother, Catherine Harrington, had been awake all night, pacing the marbled floors of her estate. She had a love-hate relationship with Christine. On one hand, she admired Christine's gentle spirit. On the other hand, she believed her son was destined for a more socially established bride, perhaps someone with family connections rivaling their own. But Catherine also had a sense of honor. She refused to condone Michael's rumored extramarital affairs and had warned him countless times, "Recklessness will one day cost you everything." However, Catherine was no stranger to the Harrington men's roving tendencies. Her own late husband, William, had once been rumored to keep a mistress in Hong Kong. Despite the gossip, Catherine had stoically carried on, raising Michael and maintaining the family's pristine public image. She had grown used to silencing scandals with discreet payoffs or carefully orchestrated denials. Though she had confronted Michael privately, urging him to treat Christine with respect, she had never threatened to cut him off. In the end, her maternal instincts and her desire to preserve the Harrington family name kept her from pushing Michael too hard. But that night, with the storm raging, Catherine found her patience wearing thin. Christine's mother, Linda Parsons, had called Catherine's personal line, announcing that Christine was in the hospital alone. Linda was livid, demanding to know Michael's whereabouts, accusing the Harrington family of carelessness. Catherine had never heard Linda so furious. Unsettled and sensing a potential scandal, Catherine dialed Michael's number repeatedly, each attempt going unanswered. Only after Michael left the nightclub did he call his mother back. In a brief exchange, he blurted, "I'm on my way to the hospital. I messed up. I'll fix it." Then he hung up. Catherine lowered the phone from her ear, dread settling like a leaden weight in her chest. By midnight, Christine was in active labor. Her contractions came fast and hard, leaving her with only seconds of respite. Every nerve in her body vibrated with pain, yet her deepest ache emanated from an emotional wound, her husband's absence. Nurses and the obstetrician, Dr. Keller, encouraged her to push or to breathe in certain rhythms, but the hospital room felt like a place of loneliness. Anxiety gnawed at her composure, sweat trickled down her brow, and tears slid unbidden from her eyes. Linda Parsons arrived shortly after receiving Catherine's frantic call. Christine, eyes blurred with pain, reached for her mother. Relief flooded her that at least one family member was there, but hurt gripped her at the realization that it wasn't Michael. Together, they navigated the next hour. Linda mopped Christine's forehead with a cool cloth, whispered encouragement in her ear, and tried to keep her from the brink of despair. But a question lingered in Linda's mind. Where was Michael? In Linda's eyes, his failure to show was inexcusable, no matter how busy he might have been. The clock ticked on, and Christine felt a wave of exhaustion creep in. Waves of pain and tension pressed upon her, each stronger than the last. At times, she clenched her mother's hand and prayed that Michael would burst through the door. The minutes were interminable. She saw Linda shoot furious glances at the clock, and Christine felt a swirl of heartbreak and anger. She kept hearing the echo of her mother's earlier warnings. Linda had insisted that Michael's repeated absences weren't just business-related. She'd told Christine never to ignore those small warning bells of suspicion. But Christine had foolishly clung to her illusions, wanting to believe her husband was loyal at heart. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the double doors to the delivery floor swung open, and in rushed Michael, drenched in rain. Sweat and raindrops merged on his forehead, his suit jacket sopping. He skidded to a stop just outside Christine's room, uncertain if he had the right to go in. A nurse shot him a disapproving glare, but she let him pass, ignoring Linda's protests for Christine's sake, maybe. A father's presence might still ease the emotional strain. When Michael entered the room, Christine's eyes flickered open. Even through the haze of pain and heartbreak, she felt conflicting emotions, relief that he had come at last, anger that he had taken so long, and a faint flicker of hope that maybe this moment would prompt him to change. With shaky hands, Michael approached the bedside, quietly murmuring her name, but Christine's eyes snapped with pain, both physical and emotional. She only had the energy to choke out, "Where were you?" before another contraction tore through her. Michael could barely answer. Guilt choked him. He mumbled something about a traffic jam, but Christine knew there was more to the story. Their gazes locked, and in the throbbing silence, Christine recognized a secret in his eyes she'd been trying to deny for months. He was lying, and she was too tired to pretend it away. The labor's intensity demanded full focus, leaving Christine unable to confront Michael in that moment. Dr. Keller calmly guided her through a wave of contractions, encouraging her to push in measured sequences. Christine cried out, clinging to the hospital bed, while Linda and Michael each gripped one of her hands. The monitors beeped, signifying the baby's fluctuating heartbeat. In a maddening cacophony of pain, fear, and adrenaline, Christine gave the final push. At the stroke of 2:14 a.m., the baby's cries cut through the stormy night. A boy, pink and fragile, arrived in the world. Christine's breath came in ragged gasps, tears of relief dampening her cheeks. The medical staff laid the baby on her chest. She felt warmth, love, and awe surging within. For a fleeting second, she glanced over at Michael, searching his eyes. Was he feeling the same rush of wonder, or was he still caught in the web of lies? She saw tears in his eyes, genuine or not, she couldn't tell. Exhaustion clouded her ability to read his expression accurately, but she sensed his tension. Even in that sacred moment, an invisible gulf yawned between them. Linda paced outside while the nurses cleaned and checked the newborn. She was torn between joy at having a grandson and resentment over Michael's tardiness. In the hallway, Linda noticed Catherine Harrington entering the ward, her face lined with worry. Catherine opened her arms to Linda in a conciliatory gesture, but Linda pulled back, refusing a hug. She couldn't help but scold the older woman for her son's failures. Catherine's face fell, but she mustered a stony resolve. "Linda, I understand your anger, but please, let's focus on Christine. We need to make sure she recovers and that the baby is healthy." Linda, her voice trembling, responded, "Healthy or not, the mother of my grandchild has spent months alone. Where was your son then? Where was he tonight? If Christine had died in childbirth, would he have only arrived in time for the funeral?" The stinging words made Catherine flinch. Deep inside, Catherine felt the familiar mixture of shame and protectiveness. She, too, had once been let down by a Harrington man. but years of managing scandals had taught her the art of composure. She pursed her lips and whispered, "We can't change the past hour, Linda, but I promise I will do everything in my power to ensure Michael makes it up to Christine, to you. I don't want our families torn apart." Linda simply sighed, too drained to continue the argument. She nodded stiffly and turned her attention back to the room where her daughter lay recovering. Over the next 2 days, Christine tried to rest, tend to her newborn son named Gabriel, and make sense of her fractured marriage. She noticed how Michael drifted in and out of the hospital room, as though plagued by guilt. He brought her expensive bouquets that seemed more like display pieces than heartfelt gestures. She didn't have the energy to care about lilies and roses, not when she needed him to hold her hand and promise he would never leave her again. She watched him anxiously check his phone, always ensuring it was on silent mode, as if waiting for a call he dared not answer in her presence. When visitors came, business associates, extended family, even old friends from her hometown, Michael put on the perfect show, standing by Christine's side, introducing baby Gabriel, and making proud, fatherly statements. But the moment they left, Christine could feel his restlessness. He mumbled about urgent business deals, property developments, or investment summits. Sometimes his phone would light up with an unknown caller, and he'd step out into the hallway to speak in hushed tones. Christine's heart twisted each time, suspecting Valentina or someone connected to that new life he was leading. One afternoon, Christine mustered the courage to say, "Michael, the first know there's someone else." The tension in the room snapped like a wire pulled too tight. He glanced at the door as though planning to flee, but he couldn't. Christine's eyes bore into his. She saw him swallow, and for a second the guilt was plain on his face. He hesitated, then shook his head in denial. "You're just tired," he said. "We'll talk when you're better." Christine felt rage spark in her chest. "I gave birth alone. You realize that, don't you? You lied about a business meeting. You left me here in pain. I'm not imagining any of this." Michael exhaled, dragging a hand down his face. "Christine, I'm sorry. I should have been here. I can't change that. But things are complicated at work. My new investors are requiring me to keep up with them socially. I have to hold dinners, go to clubs. They pay attention to every gesture, every relationship. They demand a certain lifestyle." Christine blinked, stunned by the sheer absurdity of that excuse. "So, your new investors insisted that you abandon your pregnant wife and entertain a socialite?" Her voice quavered with sarcasm. "That's the job now." She saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. He opened his mouth as if to retort, but then just shook his head. Silence settled, thick and suffocating. She broke it, her tone steady but quiet. "We have a son now. If you want this family to stay intact, you need to come clean about everything. This is our last chance." He simply nodded, avoiding eye contact. She let her tears fall silently, turning away. If he couldn't even muster an apology free of half-truths, how could she trust him to be a father? Christine was discharged 2 days later. She was still weak and pale, having lost a lot of blood during labor. Despite her precarious health, Michael insisted she move into his mother's estate for better care. Linda argued that Christine should recuperate at her own childhood home, where she could be free from the Harrington drama. But Michael and Catherine insisted their home was equipped with private nurses, security, and all comforts. Torn and exhausted, Christine relented, hoping to keep the peace. The Harrington estate was indeed opulent gilded mirrors, crystal chandeliers, soft carpets, and staff at every corner. The place intimidated Christine now, more than ever, because it felt like entering a gilded cage. Catherine hovered, trying to care for Gabriel and Christine with great attention. Linda hovered just as intensely, glaring at the slightest slip in Harrington courtesy. Michael, meanwhile, slipped in and out, citing urgent deals. Each time he left, Christine's chest tightened. She lived in dread of discovering more evidence of his affair. On a drizzly morning, Christine mustered the courage to confront her mother-in-law. She wanted to know if Catherine had knowledge of Michael's betrayal. Christine found Catherine in the estate's conservatory, pruning potted orchids. Quietly, she asked, "Did Michael bring another woman into our life? Please, if you know something, tell me." Catherine's face fell. She set down her pruning shears, avoiding Christine's gaze. "I've heard rumors. I won't lie to you. I confronted Michael months ago, told him to end whatever nonsense was going on. I believed him when he said it was just business associates and networking. But sometimes my intuition told me differently." She sighed. "Christine, I don't want to see you suffer. I was once in your position. Michael's father, William, well, he was rumored to have mistresses abroad. I turned a blind eye because that's what I was taught. In the Harrington family, public scandal is worse than any private sin. But you deserve better than living in denial." Stunned by the admission, Christine felt tears pooling in her eyes. "So, you're telling me to accept this? To ignore it?" she asked. Her voice trembled. Catherine shook her head, eyes shining with regret. "No, I'm telling you that you have a choice. If Michael refuses to change, you don't need to remain shackled by a broken vow. This is your life, yours and Gabriel's. Don't make my mistake of enduring silently. Unless he truly chooses to repent, you must consider your own well-being." Meanwhile, Valentina Rousseau's presence continued to loom over the Harrington family like a dark cloud. A week after Christine's discharge, Michael's phone lit up one morning as he was changing. Gabriel's diaper, one of the few fatherly acts Christine had seen him perform. Valentina's name appeared. Christine, who was propped against pillows in bed, froze, her eyes burning into the phone screen. Michael's expression shifted from mild panic to forced calm as he ended the call without speaking. He turned to Christine, who stared at him, her eyes flicking from the phone to his face. "Are you finally going to tell me the truth?" she said, voice hollow. He swallowed hard. "It's a business colleague. She's persistent. I'll handle it." He lied again, or at least tried to. That afternoon, Valentina decided to take matters into her own hands. She unexpectedly arrived at the Harrington estate, impeccably dressed in a red coat and stiletto heels, stepping out of a luxury sedan that definitely wasn't hers. Michael was in the study, poring over financial documents, and nearly spilled his coffee when the butler informed him of Valentina's presence at the gate. Frantic, he rushed out to intercept her before she made a scene inside. The wind whipped around them in the courtyard, carrying the promise of more rain. Valentina glared at him. "You haven't returned my calls for days," she said coldly. "We need to talk." Michael looked around nervously, aware that any staff member could overhear. "You have no right coming here," he hissed. "This is my family's home. I told you I needed time to sort things out." "Sort things out?" Valentina retorted. "You promised me you'd leave your wife once the baby was born. You said you were only waiting to avoid scandal during her pregnancy. Now you won't even pick up the phone." Michael felt his chest tighten. He'd never told Valentina he would leave Christine. Or had he? His mind hazed. There had been so many nights of champagne, indulgences, and overblown promises. Could he have said something that gave her false expectations? He stammered, Look, I need more time. Christine is in a fragile state. My son is only a week old. You can't just barge in here demanding I break up my family overnight." Valentina's features twisted with anger. "Don't play innocent with me, Michael. You used to shower me with lavish gifts and vow we'd be together. Now that the baby is here, you're ghosting me, trying to patch things up with your wife like you're some saintly husband. I won't be brushed aside." He closed his eyes, wrestling with regret, fear, and a sense of responsibility to both women. Please, just give me some time to figure out how to handle this, he pleaded. Valentina narrowed her eyes. Fine, she said, her voice dripping with scorn. But don't forget that your entire business empire hinges on the social network I introduced you to. I know secrets about your finances, your public image. If you think you can discard me and keep your precious reputation, think again. I'm not someone you can buy off with hush money. She turned on her heel and stalked back to her car. Michael stood there, the storm clouds gathering overhead. For the first time, he realized he was caught in a snare he himself had laid. The future of his marriage, his family name, and his entire fortune was on a razor's edge. Rumors of Valentina's brazen visit spread among the household staff. Word reached Linda Parsons, who wasted no time confronting Michael at breakfast the next morning. What on earth are you doing, parading some mistress at your mother's front gate? Have you no shame? Linda snapped, slamming her hand down on the table. Christine stood nearby, her face blanching with every syllable. Catherine Harrington hovered in the doorway, wringing her hands. Michael shot to his feet, eyes flashing with indignation. That's enough, Linda, he yelled. This is still my home. You can't just speak to me like... No, Christine cut in, her voice trembling. No, you don't get to order us around. This is about me, Gabriel, and the future you promised us. Either you come clean or I'm gone. Do you understand? I'm done playing this game, Michael. Michael glared at her, as if wanting to argue, but he saw the unwavering determination in her eyes. He shifted, guilt contorting his features. Finally, with a trembling sigh, he admitted, Valentina isn't just a business contact. She is someone I got involved with. It started as a way to secure certain investments. Then it spiraled. I never meant to let it go this far. The words spilled out like a confession to a crime he couldn't undo. Christine's face was a mask of heartbreak. Linda clenched her fists. Catherine sank into a chair, tears of shame in her eyes. Silence filled the grand dining room, the clicking of the chandelier overhead the only sound. Christine took a deep breath, tears welling up as she addressed Michael. Why? We had everything. Why wasn't that enough? He shook his head, as though searching for an explanation that would make sense of his senseless betrayal. Power, money. I don't know. I guess it got to me. I'm sorry, Christine. I never wanted to lose you. But the apology felt hollow, overshadowed by the enormity of his deception. Christine pressed her lips together in a grim line. How could I ever believe you again? She turned away from him, her heart pounding, torn between grief, rage, and the maternal urge to protect Gabriel. On some level, she wanted to run. On another level, she felt the weight of her marriage vows. She recalled Catherine's words, unless he truly chooses to repent, you must consider your own well-being. She glimpsed Linda's stricken face, feeling her mother's unwavering support as a lifeline. For years, she had tried to mold herself into the perfect society wife, trusting Michael more than she trusted her own instincts. And this was the outcome. Just when the Harrington household seemed on the brink of implosion, the unthinkable happened. Michael's business empire began to crumble. Rumors surfaced that a new competitor, financed by an unknown benefactor, was drawing away Michael's key clients. The media buzzed with speculation that Michael's brand had grown stale, overshadowed by fresh talent in the investment world. Stocks he owned started plummeting, and a handful of board members resigned in quick succession. Desperate to stem the hemorrhage, Michael spent countless hours locked in his home office, phone pressed to his ear. He called bankers, accountants, lawyers, anyone who could help him salvage what was left. At the same time, he wrestled with Valentina's veiled threats. She kept texting him demands, alluding to private information that could destroy him if leaked. He had no idea how to navigate this new landscape. He was haunted by the possibility that she was the puppet master behind the competitor eroding his client base. Christine watched this downfall from a distance, forced to stay at the estate because she was still recovering. She found it ironic that the same ambition which had once seduced her, Michael's unstoppable drive for success, was now poisoning him. He looked tired, older by a decade, the spark in his eyes replaced by desperation. And she felt a strange sense of relief, realizing she no longer idolized him. The rose-tinted glasses had shattered. She was simply a mother now, focused on Gabriel's well-being. The twist came when an internal auditor discovered traces of suspicious transactions in Michael's ledgers, significant funds funneled to shell companies affiliated with Valentina. This bombshell threatened Michael with legal consequences. Should the authorities catch wind, he could be indicted for fraud or money laundering. In panic, he consulted his mother, Catherine. Together, they decided to hush it up through undisclosed settlements, mortgaging parts of the Harrington estate if necessary. Christine, upon learning the severity of the situation, felt a tumult of emotions: anger, betrayal, pity, and an odd sense of justice. Michael's downfall was partly self-inflicted. He'd risked everything for illusions of grandeur. Her mother, Linda, advised her to pack her things and leave. "This is his mess," Linda said. "Don't let him drag you and Gabriel down with him." But Christine hesitated. Despite everything, she felt a pang of loyalty. Once, she had loved this man enough to marry him. There was also Catherine, who had shown her maternal kindness in recent weeks, advising her to put herself and Gabriel first. In truth, Christine just didn't know if leaving was right or if staying could ever mend the deep wounds. She felt paralyzed, gripped by the swirling chaos. Michael's business meltdown reached a crescendo when his biggest investor pulled out, citing lack of confidence in his leadership. Overnight, the Harrington brand lost half its value. Headlines read, "Harrington Empire in peril and once mighty mogul on the brink." Paparazzi camped outside the estate. Every phone call was met with dread, every ring signaling the potential for more bad news. With nowhere to turn, Michael finally broke. Late one evening, after receiving a particularly grim message from his broker, he walked into Gabriel's nursery. The baby slept peacefully in a mahogany crib, oblivious to the turmoil that threatened to engulf his parents. Michael stood there, tears sliding down his cheeks as he realized how badly he had failed. He had believed money and external validation were everything. Now, stripped of his illusions, he felt naked and lost, uncertain what truly mattered. In that raw moment, Christine entered the nursery and found him sobbing quietly. She froze, uncertain whether to console him or maintain her distance. Sensing her presence, Michael turned, eyes red. He swallowed hard and said, "I'm sorry. It sounded like a plea. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm done lying. I'll sell the companies if I have to. I'll repay every debt. His voice cracked. I just want to be a father to Gabriel, if you'll let me." Christine's heart twisted. She approached him slowly, uncertain if this breakdown was genuine or another performance. Gently, she looked him in the eyes. "What changed?" He sighed, shaking his head. "I thought I was invincible," he confessed. "When the money poured in, the power was intoxicating. I lost sight of what's real you. Gabriel, the marriage I promised to honor. I can't fix the past, but I want a future with you. Please, don't leave me." His words hung in the nursery's soft glow. Christine felt her tears trickle. She realized that she did love him once. There was a part of her that still wanted the dream they'd shared. But the hurt was so deep. "Michael," she whispered, "it's not that simple. You hurt me in ways I might never forget. I can't just wave a wand and pretend it didn't happen." He nodded, eyes cast downward. I know, I'll prove to you if you give me a chance. No more business expansions, no more dinners with questionable people. I'll place what's left of my fortune into a trust for Gabriel. I'll step back from the spotlight. I'll do anything. Christine's silence was heavy. She stared at her son, so innocent, his tiny chest rising and falling. Whatever choice she made now would shape his future. Catherine's words echoed in her head. Unless he truly chooses to repent, you must consider your own well-being. For the first time, she sensed that maybe, just maybe, Michael's regret was real. She decided to take it one day at a time. I'm not promising forgiveness, she told him softly, but I won't close the door on trying. Relief flooded his eyes. He gently touched the edge of the crib, tears trembling on his eyelashes. They stood there in silence, a shaky truce formed, each acknowledging the fragile thread of hope that might yet bind them. Just when it seemed Michael might salvage some fragments of his life, Valentina played her final card. A scathing article appeared online, detailing Michael's affair, complete with time-stamped photos of him and Valentina entering exclusive clubs, exiting hotels, and traveling together on his private jet. More damning was the evidence of questionable funds wired from Michael's businesses to shell entities under Valentina's name. The article was accompanied by sensational headlines: Millionaire Michael Harrington's pregnant wife abandoned, Mistress spills the beans and from riches to ruin, the downfall of a philandering mogul. The media feasted on every salacious detail. Christine felt physically ill, reading the allegations that her child was born amid the father's betrayal. Paparazzi swarmed near the gates, cameras trained on any family member who stepped out. Linda was furious, threatening legal action. Catherine's health worsened from stress. The Harrington brand, already teetering, went into freefall. Michael tried to shield Christine from the outside world, instructing security to keep reporters at bay. He filed a cease and desist letter against Valentina's claims. Though he knew the evidence was real, he had given it to her himself in moments of careless trust. The question now was how Christine would react. She had been merciful when he'd confessed in private, but seeing it plastered in public was another matter. To his surprise, Christine approached him with a calm that bordered on eerie. "Are you going to fight this?" she asked, handing him a printout of the article. "Or are you going to let it consume you?" He rubbed his eyes, exhausted. "I'll fight it if you want me to. I'll do everything in my power to protect you and Gabriel. But I won't deny that it happened. Maybe I deserve this public shaming. I just don't want you to be hurt anymore." Her tone was measured. "I am hurt. But for Gabriel's sake, I'll stand by you in dealing with these vultures. That doesn't mean I forgive what happened. It means I need to protect our son from living in scandal. We need to be unified in that." Michael nodded, tears threatening once again. He knew this was Christine's strength, her unwavering devotion to Gabriel. She wasn't fighting for him as much as she was fighting for their child, and he would do everything possible not to squander this final chance. In the weeks that followed, Christine and Michael presented a united front, issuing statements that they were handling the matter privately for the sake of their newborn son. Catherine used her social connections to mitigate some of the negative press, calling in favors to quell the more intrusive tabloids. Linda, for her part, stood by Christine, offering emotional support, but also keeping Michael on a short leash. If he stepped out of line again, Linda would drag her daughter and grandchild back home without hesitation. Ironically, the scandal brought a touch of relief. The wave of public scrutiny forced Michael to sever ties with Valentina definitively and close the shady financial channels. He sold off a significant chunk of his businesses at a steep discount, focusing on a single core company that he believed could be rebuilt with integrity. He spent more hours at home, attempting to bond with Gabriel, offering to help Christine in ways he'd never done before, changing diapers, rocking the baby to sleep, even cooking simple meals. Christine was hesitant to trust these gestures initially, suspecting they were fleeting attempts at redemption. But over time, she noticed changes in his demeanor. He listened more, boasted less, and seemed visibly pained whenever he recalled his affair. None of this erased the heartbreak or the nights Christine had spent alone, sobbing in the dark. She continued her therapy sessions, discussing her battered self-esteem, her conflicting emotions about staying. She also insisted Michael seek counseling for himself to address the root causes of his infidelity and toxic ambition. He agreed without argument, showing up to sessions with a seriousness that surprised even Christine. Gradually, a fragile new dynamic settled in. Michael remained under legal and financial scrutiny for months, working tirelessly to prove he was a legitimate businessman, not a fraud. Valentina dropped off the radar after her story was published, likely paid by rival investors to sabotage Michael's empire or simply seeking the limelight for her own gains. Regardless, her role in their lives ended as abruptly as it began, leaving deep scars in its wake. Nearly a year passed after Gabriel's birth, a year during which Christine fought through sleepless nights, wavering emotions, and the avalanche of media fallout. Yet, even in the darkness, glimmers of hope surfaced. As her physical strength returned, she discovered an inner resilience that went beyond merely surviving Michael's betrayal. She had been through heartbreak, loneliness, and public scrutiny, but now she was determined to channel her suffering into something meaningful. She vividly remembered lying alone in the hospital, unsure if Michael would ever show. The memory of that fear and abandonment turned into the spark for her new passion project, a charity initiative aimed at helping vulnerable mothers navigate medical, financial, and emotional hurdles during pregnancy. When Catherine learned of Christine's plans, she offered to leverage her philanthropic network to secure initial seed funding. Despite their sometimes fraught relationship, Catherine admired Christine's determination and introduced her to donors, granting her access to gala events and charitable circles. Inspired by Gabriel's arrival, Christine named her organization the Gabriel Project. Though at first it consisted of little more than a small office space and a handful of volunteers, Christine nurtured it like a second child. She spent long hours speaking with prospective sponsors, writing grant proposals, and recruiting medical professionals who could provide affordable healthcare services or counseling to pregnant women in need. In time, the Gabriel Project held community workshops, offered classes on infant care, and provided mental health support, especially for women who felt isolated by their circumstances. Each day, Christine drew on her memory of those cold hospital hallways to remind herself why this mattered so deeply. Meanwhile, Michael was forced to examine the wreckage of his once thriving empire. Over half of his businesses were either sold off or restructured under new owners, leaving him with a single core company that had survived the scandal. Racked with guilt and the fear of losing Christine entirely, he focused on rebuilding with integrity. One of his first public statements delivered at a shareholders' meeting was a promise to adopt strict ethical guidelines, prioritize transparent accounting, and incorporate philanthropic endeavors into his business model. Initially, some investors scoffed, accusing him of staging a PR stunt to regain credibility. But over time, as he stuck to his word, skepticism gave way to a cautious respect. Behind the scenes, Michael was humbler, more thoughtful. The once arrogant mogul who enjoyed lavish galas and glittering affairs had vanished, replaced by a man who woke at 2:00 a.m. to cradle his crying son and learned how to rock him gently back to sleep. He replaced business dinners with calls to mentors who could guide him toward ethical investments. For the first time in his life, Michael sought professional therapy, both individual and couples counseling with Christine, to confront the roots of his egotism and habitual need for validation. While therapy was often uncomfortable, it gave him tools to recognize his triggers and slowly unlearn the toxic patterns that had led to his infidelity. Even with visible signs of change, Christine wrestled daily with the trauma of Michael's betrayal. Every time he stepped out of the estate, every time his phone vibrated with a message, her stomach clenched. Part of her believed he would betray her again, disappearing into the night for some clandestine rendezvous. And though Michael insisted he was done with that life, years of heartbreak wouldn't heal overnight. Their arguments often flared over seemingly mundane topics: what time Michael would be home, how much money should be funneled into the new business, whether Catherine was intruding too much on Gabriel's upbringing. More than once, Christine stormed away from the dinner table in tears, while Michael bowed his head in quiet despair. But instead of shutting down or burying their anger, they forced themselves to talk it out, sometimes with a counselor present. Bit by bit, they learned to lay boundaries, discuss finances transparently, and hold each other accountable. Throughout the tumult, Linda Parsons, Christine's mother, remained an unwavering force. She made frequent visits to the Harrington estate, unafraid to stare Michael down with clear disapproval if she suspected he was slipping back into old habits. Yet, Linda also recognized that Michael was trying. When she saw him up late, meticulously reviewing charity finances for the Gabriel Project, or struggling to heat a bottle for Gabriel at 3 in the morning, she acknowledged his effort. Though she rarely offered praise, her criticisms softened into cautious tolerance. Her primary concern was Christine's well-being, and she privately counseled her daughter to remain vigilant but open to reconciliation if it meant providing Gabriel a stable home. About 10 months into this uneasy truce, Michael arranged a surprise for Christine. He took her to see the newly renovated offices of his core company. The walls featured framed photos of philanthropic work, including some from the Gabriel Project's latest outreach events. He had set aside a corner of the main lobby dedicated to charitable partnerships. When Christine stepped in and saw pictures of mothers holding healthy newborns, each caption crediting the Gabriel Project for its involvement, tears pricked her eyes. Part of her wanted to remain guarded, but seeing how he publicly honored her efforts and how he tied his re-envisioned business to a cause she cherished moved her more than any diamond ring could have. Their relationship was still a patchwork quilt of trust, stitched together from apologies, late-night confessions, and measured acts of kindness. Yet, for the first time in a long while, Christine dared to believe that maybe they could stand on common ground again. She was no fool. She carried her scars openly, reminding herself that betrayal had a way of creeping in through cracks in communication. But she also recognized that Michael was a different man, shaped by humiliation, penance, and the love he had almost lost. On Gabriel's first birthday, Michael suggested a small vow renewal ceremony, a private gathering on the estate's manicured lawn, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. Christine initially hesitated. The wound was still tender, but Linda encouraged her to listen to her heart. Catherine, who had seen her own share of heartbreak in the Harrington family, offered to handle the details, ensuring the ceremony would be simple and modest, free from the public eye. When the day arrived, only immediate family and closest friends were present. Candles flickered in the gentle evening breeze, illuminating a small altar adorned with white lilies. Christine held Gabriel in her arms while Michael stood across from her, hands shaking with emotion. In front of everyone, he openly confessed his failings: the night he failed to show at the hospital, the lies and lavish outings, the arrogance that nearly cost him his family. His voice cracked as he vowed, "I will spend the rest of my life making amends to you, Christine, and to our son. My greatest regret is that I abandoned you when you needed me most. But from this moment forward, you will never stand alone." Tears streaked Christine's cheeks. She didn't pretend to forget or dismiss the betrayal that had nearly destroyed them. Rather, she acknowledged her pain openly, stating that trust was a fragile treasure she could only give again in small increments. She spoke of the fear and the loneliness, the nights of second-guessing whether to stay or go, and yet she concluded by affirming her decision to try, to keep walking forward, albeit cautiously, for Gabriel's sake and for the possibility of renewed love. Their guests witnessed every raw emotion, from regret to relief, stitched into those exchanged vows. When Christine and Michael finally kissed, the applause was subdued but meaningful. It was an embrace not of perfect romance, but of hard-won commitment in the face of life's ugliest storms. By the end of that day, Christine sensed a subtle shift. She realized happily ever after was a myth. The real victory lay in wrestling through life's trials and choosing to continue alongside each other. She had survived the worst version of her husband, and he had survived the worst version of himself. Now, they had a small chance to build something more authentic than the idealized marriage they once had. Back inside the estate, the family gathered for a quiet celebration. Gabriel giggled in his grandmother Linda's arms, while Catherine looked on with misty eyes, handing out glasses of sparkling cider. In that moment, Christine recognized that the Harrington family's future wasn't about perfection or the pursuit of endless ambition. It was about humility, honesty, and shared determination to protect what truly mattered: love, loyalty, and their precious son. Thus, after a year of sorrow, soul-searching and stumbling steps, they reached a resolution, one that was neither neat nor guaranteed, but real. The road ahead would be long and full of challenges, yet Christine took heart in knowing she was no longer alone. She had forged her own identity through suffering, found a calling that ignited her passion, and reclaimed her voice in a place that once silenced her. In that sense, the vow renewal marked not a fairy tale ending, but a new beginning, one defined by mutual commitment to healing, growth, and a promise to stand by each other through every storm to come. Years later, Christine would look back on that stormy night in the hospital and marvel at her own fortitude. She had become a mother under the harshest circumstances, discovering her strength in the crucible of betrayal. Michael's transformation, while never erasing the past, showed that people could change when faced with losing everything they once believed they couldn't live without. The story of Christine and Michael Harrington, of the pregnant wife, waiting alone in the hospital while the millionaire was out with his mistress, became a cautionary tale among their acquaintances. Some insisted Christine was a fool for giving him another chance. Others admired her bravery to rebuild her life on her own terms, demanding accountability from the very man who had deceived her. In the end, the Harrington name survived, albeit with a different meaning. Where it once signified unbridled ambition, it now hinted at a second chance earned through humility and heartfelt remorse. Most importantly, for Christine, it represented a path she chose not to abandon entirely, forging a future for herself and for Gabriel, one where she refused to remain silent, and where love was tested, battered, and ultimately tempered by fire. Thank you for joining us on this tumultuous journey of betrayal, heartbreak, and ultimate redemption. Christine Harrington's lonely hours in that hospital room remind us of the power of hope, even when all seems lost. From the whispers of a socialite's affair to the collapse of an entire business empire, we saw how one decision can unravel a lifetime's worth of trust, yet also spark a profound transformation. Christine's strength and unwavering love for her newborn son paved a path toward forgiveness, but it was never an easy road. She endured betrayal, confronted secrets, and bravely rebuilt her life. Michael's downfall showed us that redemption is not impossible. It is, however, neither guaranteed nor painless.
A quiet suburb, a neatly trimmed lawn, and a secret that threatened to split one family forever. It all began on a stormy night when Mark Anderson, seemingly the perfect husband, let his alluring mistress step into his pregnant wife's bedroom and into her bed. By the time dawn broke, flashing police lights flooded the driveway, and neighbors peered through windows in disbelief. No one could imagine how a once ordinary couple fell into such chaos. But within these walls lay hidden confessions, desperate betrayals and heart-wrenching choices that would test loyalty, break trust, and leave everyone asking, how could it ever have come to this? Mark Anderson stared at the white picket fence in front of his modest suburban home on the outskirts of Denver, Colorado. The day was sunny, and a light breeze ruffled the neatly manicured lawn. He always took pride in appearances. He liked knowing everything was in its rightful place, reflecting an outward image of success and respectability. His wife Sarah often teased him about his perfectionist streak. In fact, it was one of the things she had found so endearing when they first met back in college. Their romance felt like a fairy tale in the beginning. Long strolls by the campus lake, late-night conversations about hopes and dreams, and shared laughter that echoed through dorm hallways. Mark was diligent, always rechecking his notes and color-coding everything in his backpack, while Sarah was more laid back, bringing a sense of warmth and spontaneity to his otherwise structured world. They graduated together, he with a degree in business administration, she in elementary education. Soon after, they were married on a crisp autumn afternoon, surrounded by family and a few close friends. It seemed they were destined for a happy life, ticking off all the boxes: stable jobs, a well-furnished home, and plans for children. Yet beneath the surface of this idyllic snapshot, a subtle tension had begun to settle in. As the years progressed, Mark found himself increasingly restless, obsessing over career goals, finances, and the desire for more excitement. Sarah noticed changes in him. Little things like how he lingered on his phone too often, or occasionally arrived home late with half-hearted excuses. She was patient, chalking it up to stress. After all, Mark had always been ambitious, and it made sense he might be feeling the pressure at work. When Sarah discovered she was pregnant, Mark's reaction was polite and supportive, though it lacked the unbridled enthusiasm she had expected. He hugged her, whispered reassuring words, but there was a distance in his eyes. Instead of celebrating, she found herself chasing him for each prenatal appointment, reminding him of the baby's progress. The more she tried to draw him in, the more he seemed to drift. She told herself it was a passing phase, that once the baby was born, Mark would realize the beautiful miracle they were about to share. But somewhere deep inside, Sarah felt a pang of worry, a whisper that warned her not all was right. Real trouble took root one evening when Sarah's best friend, Jessica Lee, visited for dinner. Jessica, a sharp-eyed, warm-hearted woman with a knack for reading people, discreetly pulled Sarah aside after noticing Mark's odd behavior. He was jumpy, his laughter forced, and his phone never left his sight. Jessica offered her concerns gently, but Sarah brushed them off, not wanting to believe that the man she'd built a life with might be hiding something. If anything, she blamed Mark's anxious state on the responsibilities piling up. But Mark was in fact drowning in secrets, ones that would threaten the very foundation of his marriage. He knew it, he felt it, yet he couldn't stop what was happening. That was the cruel irony of his situation. The very qualities that had once driven him to be the responsible, overachieving husband were now pushing him to take risks he never dreamed himself capable of. While Sarah napped early in the evenings or read baby manuals in her rocking chair, Mark was scrolling through messages that made his heart pound in anticipation. messages from a woman who offered him a sense of thrill he hadn't felt in years. Her name was Carla Rodriguez, and she worked in the same office building as Mark, though in a different department. She was witty, confident, and possessed a magnetism that seemed to draw people in effortlessly. Everyone at the office talked about Carla's style, her flamboyant choice of bright pencil skirts, and the way she commanded attention during team presentations. Mark had seen her in passing, but only after being assigned to a joint project had they begun to speak. He'd noticed how she laughed at his jokes, how her eyes locked onto his when they conversed. Slowly their friendly exchanges morphed into stolen glances, then to flirtatious banter over coffee. Carla knew Mark was married. He never hid that. She even knew Sarah was pregnant. But from the moment Carla placed her hand on Mark's arm one evening during overtime, gently brushing against him, he found himself responding. He was at a precipice caught between guilt and a longing to escape from the monotony he blamed on domestic life. Carla, too, was escaping from something her own lonely nights and a string of failed relationships. They provided each other solace, a forbidden escape from their real lives. Their meetings were carefully orchestrated. Mark would fake a late work session or say he was meeting a client. Carla pretended she was staying behind to finish a report. They found dark corners in parking lots, eventually renting cheap motel rooms on the outskirts of town. Each time, Mark was sure guilt would consume him, but it never quite did lust, and adrenaline overshadowed everything. But the affair came at a cost. Mark's finances, once neatly balanced, began to suffer under secretive dinners and gifts for Carla. He found himself withdrawing from Sarah's bank account without telling her, always with the silent reassurance that he'd make it up later. He also neglected small household tasks. Sarah, now 6 months pregnant, found herself climbing step stools to change light bulbs and dragging groceries into the house alone. The tension between husband and wife continued to escalate. Sarah was frustrated and exhausted, but she tried to remain understanding. She never fully admitted to herself that Mark's distance might signify an affair. After all, he'd been loyal and devoted all the years she had known him. It was impossible, unthinkable, to consider he would betray her in such a way, especially now that they were expecting a child. Instead, she believed he was going through a personal crisis, perhaps a fear of fatherhood. Sarah confided in Jessica about her suspicions and her desire to keep the marriage intact, no matter the challenges. Then Mark made a fateful choice one Friday night. While Sarah was away at her mother's house, he invited Carla to dinner at his own home. It was a step too far, and he knew it. But Carla had teased him, saying she wanted to see how he lived. That single curiosity overshadowed every warning bell in Mark's head. He assured himself it was just dinner, just a quick look at the house, and then she'd leave. But the moment Carla stepped through the door, wearing a midnight blue dress that clung to her figure, Mark knew they had crossed a line that could never be erased. Carla marveled at the photos on the mantel, wedding pictures, snapshots of Mark and Sarah at scenic spots around Colorado. Even the ultrasound image pinned on the refrigerator. Despite it all, Carla maintained an air of detachment, as though all these tokens of Mark's married life were mere props. Yet there was a glimmer in her eyes, something like envy. Perhaps a realization that Sarah's existence was painfully real and not just some story Mark told. But she said nothing, and Mark pretended not to notice the flicker of discomfort in his mistress's gaze. After dinner, Mark opened a bottle of wine. Carla drank, swirling the red liquid in her glass, leaning against the kitchen counter, with a playful grin. The tension in the air was palpable. Even Mark, consumed by his infatuation, felt the weight of what he was doing in that moment. If Sarah came home early, if a neighbor saw something, or if Jessica decided to drop by unannounced, everything would come crashing down. But Mark brushed aside the fear and let the night's temptations drown out any lingering decency he once had. By the time Carla left, it was nearly midnight, and Mark was too intoxicated to notice he'd left behind incriminating details. A wine-stained glass on the table, a faint whiff of Carla's perfume on the couch. He cleaned up most of it the next morning, but not everything could be erased. Sarah returned the next day to find Mark unusually jittery. He barely met her eyes when she mentioned her overnight trip, merely offering a distracted smile and a quick peck on her forehead before returning to his laptop. Not one to pry, Sarah decided to let him be. Over the next week, though, she noticed more oddities. A grocery receipt with items she hadn't purchased, a new brand of perfume lingering in the bathroom. Small tears in the living room curtains, as if someone had tugged them aside in haste. Her instincts told her something was off, but each time she tried to confront Mark, he feigned ignorance or brushed off her concerns as pregnancy hormones. Sarah, unwilling to ignite a confrontation, let it slide, though her intuition screamed that she needed to dig deeper. She wondered if she was being paranoid. Jessica urged her to keep her eyes open, but also encouraged her not to jump to conclusions. Sarah's mother, Linda, who was unaware of her son-in-law's changed behavior, simply advised Sarah to rest and not overthink. But the facade was growing thinner by the day. Mark's phone buzzed incessantly with messages he refused to open in Sarah's presence. He hid credit card bills and spent evenings out under vague explanations. Each lie stacked upon the next, forging a precarious tower that threatened to collapse with the slightest shift. By the 7th month of pregnancy, Sarah's frustration peaked. She confronted Mark one evening. When she asked him point blank if there was someone else, he scoffed, calling the very suggestion absurd. He even grew indignant, accusing Sarah of not trusting him after all these years. She apologized, tears stinging her eyes, and retreated to the bedroom with a knot of dread in her stomach. It was only after she heard him slamming cupboards in the kitchen that she realized how truly disconnected they had become. Meanwhile, Carla continued her pursuit of Mark, growing bolder. She sent messages at all hours, demanded more time together, and even hinted at wanting Mark to leave Sarah. Mark, torn between his unborn child and the lust he felt for Carla, found himself buried in stress. Some part of him, however dormant, still cared for Sarah. But he couldn't break off his entanglement with Carla either. He told himself he was trapped in a scenario with no easy escape. Each day felt like stepping on thin ice, hoping it wouldn't crack. That was how things stood when Sarah planned another trip to her mother's place. Linda was having minor surgery, and Sarah wanted to help for a couple of days. Mark recognized an opportunity. He promised Sarah he would manage the house and take care of everything. In reality, he was already anticipating Carla's company. He envisioned an evening free from prying neighbors or suspicious looks. This time it felt thrillingly dangerous. He made a mental note to hide all traces properly. But Mark failed to understand the nature of secrets. They breed bigger lies, deeper guilt, and an inevitable unraveling. And that unraveling was about to accelerate much faster than even Carla anticipated. Carla arrived on a rainy evening. Mark welcomed her with a hesitant smile, but she brushed his concern aside and draped her trench coat over the chair. They shared a meal that Mark had ordered and then settled in the living room. If there was any sense of guilt, Mark buried it beneath the facade of a charming host. Carla, for her part, seemed at ease. She wandered the house, studying family photos, with a critical eye lingering especially on the ultrasound image Sarah had pinned to a corkboard in the hallway. During dinner, Carla revealed a side Mark had rarely seen, a near-obsessive curiosity about his wife's life. She asked about Sarah's routines, her profession, her due date. Mark tried to respond, vaguely uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Carla's eyes sparkled with a strange intensity when she heard that Sarah was in her 3rd trimester, as if calculating how to use this information for her own advantage. After dinner, Mark put away the plates and let Carla roam. She ended up in the master bedroom, admiring the pale blue walls and white curtains that Sarah had painstakingly chosen. The bed was neatly made, and a plush teddy bear, a gift from Sarah's friend Jessica, sat by the pillows. Carla ran her fingers along the comforter, a self-satisfied smirk tugging at her lips. "You're really living a double life, aren't you?" She teased, her tone somewhere between humor and contempt. A loving husband by day, a wild lover by night. Mark winced but mustered a forced grin. He closed the bedroom door behind him, as though trying to keep prying eyes away from the intimacy of this space. Standing next to Carla, he felt a wave of conflicting emotions: excitement, revulsion, guilt, and a strange relief that she was here at all. The evening unfolded slowly, each passing hour, an accumulation of unspoken tensions. Carla had carried an overnight bag with her, just in case, she'd said. Mark convinced himself she would leave before midnight, but as the clock approached 1 a.m., they were still tangled in conversation and half-empty wine glasses. The rainstorm outside battered the windows, making the prospect of driving home unappealing. Carla feigned helplessness. "I can't drive in this. Let me stay over." And with that, a line was crossed. Mark hesitated. Should he set her up in the guest room? Was that too blatant a sign of guilt? But Carla's cunning charm won. She tiptoed into the master bedroom, letting the overhead light cast shadows across her silhouette. Mark, helpless to resist, followed. Outside, the storm raged on, oblivious to the tempest brewing within these walls. Thus Carla ended up sleeping in Sarah's bed. The place where a pregnant wife should have found comfort and rest was now occupied by the woman who had seduced her husband. Mark tossed and turned throughout the night, haunted by the gravity of his betrayal. In fleeting moments of lucidity, he almost leaped out of bed to make Carla leave. But each time he tried, Carla would pull him back with a whisper or a touch, and the swirling mixture of fear and desire imprisoned him. A part of Mark believed he might still keep everything hidden, that come sunrise Carla would slip away, and he'd erase all traces. Sarah wouldn't be back for another day. He had time to wash the sheets, tidy up the wine glasses, and stash away Carla's belongings. But fate had other plans. Plans that neither Mark nor Carla could have predicted. The next morning, a watery sun struggled to pierce the storm clouds. Mark stirred early groggy and disoriented. Carla was curled up on Sarah's side of the bed, her hair splayed across the pillow. He stared at the ceiling, heart pounding at the thought of all that needed to be done, cleaning, changing sheets, ensuring no neighbor had spotted Carla's car. He tiptoed around the house, picking up her jacket from the living room sofa, gathering wine glasses and disposing of them in the outside trash bin. As he wrestled the trash can to the curb, Mark froze. At the far end of the block, a police cruiser crept around, the bend lights flashing, but sirens off. An immediate jolt of panic shot through his veins. Had something happened to Sarah? Did they come bearing tragic news? He looked around, scanning for any sign of an accident or trouble in the neighborhood. but the cruiser slowly rolled to a stop right in front of his driveway. Two uniformed officers stepped out, Officer Paige Morales and Officer Adam Thompson, both with stern expressions. Mark swallowed hard as they approached. This couldn't possibly be about Carla, right? They wouldn't have any reason to suspect infidelity. Unless Carla had a past Mark knew nothing about. The possibility flickered in his mind, sowing anxiety. He wiped his hands on his jeans, trying to maintain composure. "Good morning," Officer Morales said, tipping her head in greeting. "We received a report about a disturbance in this area early this morning. We're checking to ensure everything's okay." "A disturbance?" Mark repeated, his voice cracking. "Yes. A neighbor reported unusual noises, shouting. Maybe an argument late last night. They also saw a car parked out front that they didn't recognize." Mark's mind raced. His next-door neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, was known for her vigilance, especially at odd hours. Perhaps she had seen Carla arrive or heard them talking. He forced a polite smile. "I'm sorry to trouble you, officer. My wife is out of town, and I was just... Well, I might have had the television too loud last night. No arguments, though. Nothing else going on." Officer Thompson scrutinized Mark's expression. "Is there anyone else in the house with you right now?" "Mr. Anderson?" Mark felt a twist in his gut. A friend stayed over. She was caught in the storm, and..." Before he could finish, Carla emerged in the doorway, barefoot, wearing one of Sarah's robes. The color drained from Mark's face as the officers turned their attention to her. Carla's eyes flicked between them, trying to feign calm, but clearly unsettled by the unexpected arrival of law enforcement. "Good morning," she said, attempting a polite nod. Officer Morales studied Carla's attire, then exchanged a glance with her partner. "And you are..." Carla's response was quick, lacking the usual confidence. "Carla Rodriguez. I'm a colleague of Mark's. He was kind enough to let me crash here because of the storm." An awkward silence followed. The officers seemed unconvinced. Mark's posture stiffened, sweat beading on his forehead. Then Officer Thompson asked if they could step inside to talk further. Mark hesitated, fearing the officers might discover remnants of the affair, but refusing entry might look suspicious. Reluctantly, he led them into the living room, where Carla perched on the edge of the couch, hands clasped in her lap. The questions continued basic inquiries about the alleged disturbance, how Carla ended up here, whether Mark's wife was aware. Each query felt like a jab at Mark's fragile house of lies. He concocted half-truths, carefully sidestepping the real nature of Carla's presence. Meanwhile, Carla remained mostly silent, occasionally offering affirmations to Mark's statements. It seemed the officers weren't entirely convinced, but they had no concrete evidence of any crime. They reminded Mark and Carla to respect neighborhood noise ordinances and to be mindful of suspicious activity. Officer Morales handed Mark her card, suggesting he call if anything came up, her eyes lingering on him, as though warning she wasn't fully buying their story. Just when Mark thought they would leave, Carla's phone rang, blasting a shrill ring through the tense atmosphere. She scrambled to silence it, but Officer Thompson motioned for her to answer. Glancing at the caller ID, Carla paled. She stepped into the next room. Voice low. After the call, Carla re-emerged, looking shaken. Officer Thompson pressed. "Everything all right?" "Ms. Rodriguez." Carla forced a smile. "Just a family matter," she said, but her hands trembled as she tucked her phone away. Sensing the tension, Officer Morales decided to wrap up. She cast one final evaluating look over the scene, then pivoted toward the front door. The moment the officers left, Mark turned to Carla, ready to ask what was happening. But before he could open his mouth, Carla's phone chimed again. Another call. Carla stared at the screen and rejected it, exhaling shakily. "What's going on?" Mark demanded, heart still pounding from the near exposure of their affair. Carla brushed past him, grabbing her jacket and slipping into her shoes. "I have to go. I'm sorry, Mark. I'll explain later." And just like that, she was gone, leaving Mark alone in a house that now felt haunted by the shadows of betrayal and suspicion. Sarah would be home soon, and he had an endless list of cover-ups to manage. But a deeper dread gnawed at him. Carla was clearly entangled in something bigger than he'd ever imagined, and it was only a matter of time before it all caught up to them, before the next knock on the door wouldn't be as benign as a noise complaint. With Carla gone, Mark raced to erase every trace of her presence. He stripped the bed, replacing the sheets with fresh linen. He collected the empty wine bottle and glasses, tossed them in the recycling bin, and opened all the windows to air out the lingering perfume. He vacuumed the living room, wiped down counters, and even mopped the kitchen floor, desperately trying to rid the house of any memory of her. As he worked, his mind replayed the scene with the police officers. He couldn't shake the feeling that Officer Morales and Officer Thompson didn't entirely believe him. Their questions had probed deeper than a simple noise complaint. Yet what choice did Mark have but to lie? Telling the truth would mean forfeiting everything: his marriage, his home, his soon-to-be fatherhood. An hour later, Sarah called to let him know her mother was stable after the minor surgery, and that she'd be returning home by evening. Mark pretended everything was normal, forcing a light-hearted tone as he asked if she needed anything from the store. After he hung up, he crumpled onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. The pit of guilt in his stomach felt bottomless. Was it worth it, this double life, for a fleeting affair that offered excitement, but left him feeling hollow? By mid-afternoon, Mark couldn't ignore his anxiety about Carla. He texted her multiple times. Mark, 1:03 p.m. Are you okay? Mark, 1:10 p.m. Please let me know what's going on. Mark, 2:05 p.m. Carla. I'm worried. The police thing really shook me up. No response. The phone remained silent, each passing minute, feeding Mark's paranoia. He started recalling random details from their time together. Things she'd hinted at, questionable friends, financial troubles. A mention of an ex-boyfriend who was dangerous. He'd never pressed her for details, preferring their relationship remain an escape without real-world burdens. Now he regretted his willful ignorance. By 5 p.m., Mark heard the garage door open. Sarah was home. He hurriedly got up, plastering on a smile, as though he'd spent the day doing mundane chores. She walked in slowly, her baby bump prominent under a loose-fitting dress. She looked exhausted, but relieved to be home. Without a word, she set her bag down and let Mark wrap her in a hug. "How's Mum?" he asked softly. "She's fine," Sarah said. "The surgery went well and she's recovering. I just need some rest." Together they made a simple dinner, Mark fussing over Sarah, trying to be attentive to her needs. She seemed grateful, but also distant, as though sensing something was amiss. As they ate, Sarah looked at him with eyes that flickered between love and suspicion. "Mark, was everything okay here the last couple of days?" "You seem tense," she ventured. He took a sip of water to stall. "Just work stuff," he lied. "Some deadlines?" She nodded and let the subject drop. Mark exhaled. For one brief moment, He believed he might still salvage things if Carla would stay away, if the police never returned, if he could bury this chapter of his life forever. But secrets have a way of resurfacing in the most brutal fashion, and that reckoning was closer than Mark realized. Late that night, while Sarah slept fitfully, her pregnancy making it hard to find a comfortable position, Mark lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The events of the last 24 hours churned in his mind. He reached for his phone on the nightstand, desperately checking if Carla had finally texted him. Nothing. His anxiety climbed. In the dim glow of his bedside lamp, Mark scrolled through social media. He searched Carla's name, rummaging through any clues that might explain her sudden panic. He found her profile inactive, last updated weeks ago. As he scrolled further, he stumbled upon a post from a friend of Carla's referencing a certain mess Carla was in. There were no details, just cryptic comments and concerned replies. Unease prickled through him. He decided to do what he should have done from the beginning, look up Carla Rodriguez in public records. Accessing an online search, he discovered a few results indicating minor legal issues in her past. A DUI charge from years ago, a civil dispute over unpaid rent. Nothing that jumped out as immediately dangerous. Yet Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something heavier was in play. He slept fitfully, waking at dawn to Sarah's gentle stirring. She pressed a hand to her belly and turned to him, blinking in the early morning light. For a moment, they smiled at each other, a brief slice of normalcy. Mark tried to cling to that moment, to pretend they were still the couple who had once laughed on the campus lake. But the outside world wouldn't allow it. As Sarah headed to the shower, Mark's phone buzzed an unknown number. He swallowed hard and answered. "Mark." A voice whispered urgently. "Carla." "Thank God. Where have you been?" Mark scurried out of bed and closed the bedroom door behind him. "I can't talk long," Carla said, her voice hoarse. "I'm in trouble, Mark. I owe money to some people. Dangerous people. The police showed up because they were tipped off about something. It's not about us. Not exactly. But if they connect any dots..." Her voice trailed off. Mark felt his stomach churn. "Carla, what exactly did you do?" A pause. "It's complicated. I made some bad decisions. Now I need a place to stay, just for a few nights. My landlord kicked me out. I have nowhere else to go." Mark braced himself against the wall. No, Carla. You can't come here." "My wife, I have no one else to ask." She pleaded, her tone verging on desperation. "Please, I'll be discreet. I'll stay out of sight. I promise." He closed his eyes, the guilt mixing with dread. Sarah was in her final months of pregnancy, and the last thing he wanted was to endanger her or cause more stress. But Carla's frantic plea tugged at him. In some twisted sense, he felt responsible for her predicament, as if his affair had pushed her to the brink. "Let me think," he muttered finally. "I'll call you back." He ended the call and slumped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. The drama spiraled further out of control, and with each passing moment, Mark dug himself deeper into a pit of moral compromise. That morning, Sarah left for a routine prenatal checkup. She invited Mark to come along, but he claimed he had an important virtual meeting for work. Guilt gnawed at him as he watched her drive away alone, all while he contemplated how to handle his mistress's precarious situation. He called Carla back and arranged to meet her at a nearby diner, a rundown place that rarely attracted attention. When he arrived, he found her in a corner booth wearing a hoodie. sunglasses perched on her head, her face drawn and tired. She looked up at him with a mixture of relief and shame. "Thank you for meeting me," she murmured. Mark slid into the booth, grimacing at the sticky tabletop. "Tell me what's going on." Carla recounted her story in fragments. She owed a large sum to a local loan shark connected to her ex, and they'd threatened her. She had tried to pay them back, but fell behind. The previous night, she'd gotten a tip that the police had been contacted, perhaps to bring her in for questioning. She believed the noise complaint was a ruse, an attempt to locate her. Mark's head spun. This was more than a simple affair gone awry. Carla was ensnared in a criminal web, and he was now on the periphery of it. "You can't stay at my house," he repeated firmly. "It's too risky. Sarah would kill me." Carla's eyes glistened. "I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm desperate. Just a few nights. I can keep a low profile. If anyone asks, say I'm a friend from work, going through a breakup." Mark thought of Sarah's growing suspicion, the near miss with the police, the unborn child who needed a stable home. Every logical fibre in his being screamed at him to cut Carla off. Yet he felt a twisted sense of responsibility. He'd let Carla into his life. He'd ignored every red flag. Now she was pleading for help, and part of him couldn't bear to leave her in danger. Against all better judgment, he agreed to house her in the guest room for a single night. Carla's eyes brightened with gratitude. Mark cursed himself silently, knowing he was only tightening the noose around his neck. That evening, Mark lied to Sarah again. He said a colleague was in town for business and needed a place to crash for the night. Sarah, although surprised, did not protest. She was preoccupied with back pains and a baby that kicked relentlessly. Besides, Mark had rarely brought colleagues home, so she assumed it was a genuine favor. Carla arrived late, wearing a cap and oversized clothes to avoid recognition. Mark ushered her into the guest room, quickly praying the neighbors wouldn't notice. Sarah was in bed reading a pregnancy book. Mark told her he'd be up soon, then crept to the guest room where Carla lingered by the door. "You have to stay in here," he hissed. "Do not step out unless it's absolutely necessary. Sarah can't see you. She'll recognize you from the police visit." Carla nodded, her eyes downcast. "I understand. Thank you, Mark." He closed the door and returned to the master bedroom. Nerves frayed. Sarah was yawning, complaining of back pain. Mark sat beside her, gently massaging her lower spine in an attempt to soothe her. The moment felt painfully ironic. Here he was tending to his pregnant wife, while his mistress hid in the next room. Every stroke of his hand reminded him how far he'd fallen. That night, Sarah drifted off after some time, but Mark couldn't sleep. He heard every squeak of the floorboards, every rustle of movement from Carla's room. Around midnight, a text arrived on his phone. "I'm so sorry for all this. Carla." He stared at the message, feeling a twinge of pity. After a moment's thought, he tapped out a response. "Just stay put. We'll sort this out tomorrow." Morning dawned bright and tense. Sarah rose early to prepare for a follow-up doctor's appointment. Mark feigned a headache, offering to stay behind just in case his colleague needed help. Sarah seemed unconvinced, suspicion flickering in her gaze, but she gathered her belongings and left anyway. With Sarah gone, Mark hurried to Carla's room, only to find her asleep in a rumpled bed, eyes puffy from crying. He woke her gently, offering coffee. She told him she'd be out of his hair by afternoon, having made some arrangements to lay low at a friend's house. Mark felt relief wash over him. If Carla left for good, he might salvage some semblance of normalcy. But just as Carla was preparing to slip out, a frantic knocking rattled the front door. Mark's heart lodged in his throat. Not again. He peeked out a window. Officer Morales stood on the porch, hand poised to knock again. Turning, he found Carla in the hallway, terror etched across her face. "Go to the kitchen," he commanded under his breath. "Hide." As Carla disappeared, Mark inhaled sharply and opened the door, forcing a calm smile. "Officer Morales, what brings you here?" She looked at him with a stony expression, stepping forward, prompting him to let her inside. "I need to ask you a few more questions about Carla Rodriguez." Mark's blood ran cold. "Carla, I told you we worked together, and she stayed over because of the storm." Officer Morales nodded slowly. "We have information suggesting Ms. Rodriguez may be involved in illegal activities. There's a possibility she might contact you again, given your relationship. We'd like your cooperation." Swallowing hard, Mark feigned ignorance. "Look, I don't know what Carla's done. I've barely spoken to her since the other day. She hasn't contacted me." The officer gave a half smile that didn't reach her eyes. "If you hear from her, you'll let us know immediately, right?" "Of course," Mark said, managing a nod. Officer Morales seemed unconvinced, but left her card again, instructing him to call if Carla showed up. As she walked out, she let her gaze linger in the foyer, as though sensing someone else's presence. Mark held his breath until she finally exited. Heart racing, he rushed back to the kitchen where Carla was crouched behind the island, eyes wide. "She's on to us," he muttered. "You need to go, right now." Carla stood, her face grim. She slung her bag over her shoulder. "I'll call a taxi." Neither said a word as they hurried to the back door. Carla paused momentarily, turning to Mark with tears brimming. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for all of this. I never wanted to hurt you." Mark nodded, unable to find words. Then, without further ceremony, Carla rushed out the back, disappearing into the alley. Mark closed the door, exhaling a shaky breath. He could almost taste freedom, an escape from the swirling nightmare, if he could manage to keep the police at bay and Sarah unaware. But his relief was premature. For even as Carla vanished from sight, a car pulled into the driveway. Sarah was home early, carrying a bag of groceries. She spotted him at the back door, eyes narrowing with confusion. "Why are you standing there like that?" she asked, stepping into the kitchen. "Who was just here?" Mark's stomach twisted in knots. He searched for an excuse, stumbling over words. Nobody. I was just getting some air." Sarah glanced around suspiciously. "Why are you so jumpy, Mark?" He forced a smile that crumbled under Sarah's penetrating stare. Her gaze flicked to the back alley, the slight disarray of the kitchen, the traces of a second coffee mug on the counter. She wasn't naive. She knew him too well. And in that charged silence, Mark felt the final threads of his deceit unraveling. The confrontation Mark had dreaded finally erupted. Sarah demanded answers. Who was staying in the guest room? Why did she find a woman's hairbrush in the bathroom? Why was the police officer here? Each question hammered Mark's fragile composure. At first, he attempted to spin more lies, but Sarah's teary gaze and trembling voice shattered his defenses. Something in him finally broke. He confessed haltingly at first, then in a rush of words he couldn't control. He admitted to the affair, Carla's overnight stays, the police involvement. The only part he censored was Carla's criminal entanglements. He simply told Sarah that Carla was in trouble and the police had come around to question them. Sarah, stunned into silence, gripped the countertop as if to steady herself. Her face went pale, and her lips parted in disbelief. She said nothing for a long moment, then asked the question that terrified him. "Did you let her sleep? In our bed? In the bed where I've been sleeping while carrying your child?" Mark wanted to lie, but the weight of his sins was too great. He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. The noise that escaped Sarah's throat sounded like a wounded animal, a strangled cry of agony. She turned away, pressing a hand to her swollen belly as tears streamed down her cheeks. "You brought her into our home, into my bed. What kind of monster are you?" She spat, voice thick with revulsion. He reached out, but she recoiled. "Sarah, I'm sorry," he whispered, but he couldn't find words to justify the unforgivable. Without warning, Sarah's emotions surged, and she slammed her hand against the cupboard. The baby inside her kicked violently, as though sensing her turmoil. Trembling, Sarah stumbled to the living room, sinking onto the couch. Mark followed, guilt etched on his face, but she held up a hand. "Stay away," she said. Her voice choked. "I need to think. I need to understand how I married someone who could do this to me." He stood there, helpless, wanting nothing more than to console her to undo every wrong decision. But the damage was done. There was no comfort he could offer that would mend the gaping wound in her chest. It was in the midst of this tense standoff that another knock came at the door. 3 hard, distinct raps that echoed through the silent house. Mark closed his eyes, dreading what might come next. Sarah sat upright, alarmed, her tear-streaked face turning toward the tumult entrance. When Mark opened the door, Officer Morales and Officer Thompson stood there again, expressions grave. This time they weren't alone. A plain-clothes detective accompanied them, a badge clipped to his belt. Mark's heart dropped. "Mr. Anderson," the detective said, voice clipped. "May we come in?" Mark stepped aside, mind spinning. Sarah, rising from the couch, locked eyes with him, fear and betrayal mingling on her face. The detective introduced himself as Detective James Carter. "We've been investigating certain criminal activities involving Carlo Rodriguez," Carter stated, flipping open a small notebook. "We have reason to believe she's been using associates, willing or otherwise, to conceal her whereabouts and possibly launder money. We have reason to believe you might have information." Mark's hands shook. I only knew she was in some sort of trouble. She said she owed money. That's all." Detective Carter nodded. "She's wanted for questioning related to fraud and conspiracy. We believe she's been leveraging personal relationships to hide assets. Are you aware of any large sums of money being transferred through your accounts, Mr. Anderson?" The question hit Mark like a blow to the gut. Instantly, he recalled the times he'd covered Carla's expenses, the secret transfers. At the time, he thought it was just gifts or petty cash. Had she used him for something bigger? No. Mark lied weakly, his voice faltering. "I mean, I gave her money for personal emergencies, but not large sums." The detective studied Mark's face. "Ms. Rodriguez was reported at this address yesterday. We have statements from a neighbor that a woman matching her description entered your home late at night. Is that correct?" Sarah's eyes turned accusatory. She glared at Mark, arms folded protectively over her belly. Mark caught between fear of legal repercussions and shame before his wife nodded slowly. She was here, but she left. Detective Carter flicked through his notes, then addressed Sarah directly. "Mrs. Anderson, were you aware that Ms. Rodriguez spent time in your home?" Sarah's expression tightened, tears brimming again. "I only just found out." She managed her voice laced with bitterness. Carter frowned, turning back to Mark. "We'll be checking your financial records. If we find any evidence that you assisted Ms. Rodriguez in illegal activities, you'll be charged as an accomplice." Terror seized Mark. This was far worse than a mere affair exposed. He could face criminal charges. In a panic, he exclaimed, "I had no idea. She told me she was in trouble, but I didn't know about any illegal schemes. I was just trying to help." The detective let silence reign for a moment, before nodding to Officer Morales and Officer Thompson. "Let's go," he said, handing Mark his card. "If Ms. Rodriguez contacts you, call immediately, or there will be consequences." As they left, Sarah sank back onto the couch, trembling. Mark stood in the foyer, the detective's card clutched in his shaking hand. The reality of his actions closed in on him like a suffocating fog. He had betrayed his wife, endangered their child, and now potentially implicated himself in a criminal case. His once perfect life was in ruins, and he had only himself to blame. After the police left, silence descended in the living room. Sarah turned to Mark, tears shimmering in her eyes. He tried to approach, to place a reassuring hand on her shoulder, but she jerked away. "I can't do this, Mark," she said. Voice hollow. "You lied to me. You let her into our home. You risked our baby's safety." He felt the sting of her words, but any defense he tried to muster sounded weak. He could only say, "I'm sorry so many times," before it meant nothing. Sarah cradled her belly. "I need space. I need to think about how we're going to move forward, if we even can." He wanted to beg for forgiveness, to promise he'd rectify everything. But how could he? The scars were too deep. Sarah rose shakily, gathering her purse and keys. "Where are you going?" Mark asked, panic welling up in him. To Jessica's, Sarah replied, "I need someone I can trust right now." Mark nodded, knowing he had no right to stop her. He watched as she left the door, clicking softly behind her, a symbol of the distance that had grown between them. Alone in the quiet house, Mark felt a wave of despair crash over him. Everything was unraveling, and he wasn't sure there was enough thread left to stitch his life back together. Days passed. Sarah remained with Jessica, avoiding Mark's calls, except for brief updates about her pregnancy. She needed to check in with her doctor regularly, and Mark was sick with worry about her stress levels. He texted her. Apologies poured out his remorse in long messages, but rarely received more than a one-word reply. Meanwhile, the police made good on their promise to investigate Mark's finances. They subpoenaed his bank statements and credit card records. He had to retain a lawyer, a tired, middle-aged man named Leonard Price, who took Mark's frantic calls at all hours. Price assured Mark that unless they found direct evidence of large-scale fraud, he'd likely avoid severe charges, but the possibility of an arrest loomed, overshadowing every waking moment. Carla, for her part, vanished entirely. Mark heard nothing from her, no texts, no calls. He told the police he hadn't seen her, which was the truth. She had disappeared without a trace. Detective Carter stopped by once more, questioning Mark about specific transactions. Mark tried to explain they were gifts or petty loans, but Carter remained skeptical. Jessica occasionally messaged Mark in Sarah's stead, telling him to stay away until further notice. She informed him that Sarah was safe, but deeply distressed, her blood pressure rising dangerously due to the emotional turmoil. Hearing that Mark felt crippling guilt. He had pledged to love and protect Sarah, and yet he was the one jeopardizing her health and possibly their child's. A week later the phone rang. Mark answered automatically, half hoping it was Sarah. Instead, Carla's voice crackled on the other end. "Mark, I'm so sorry," she said, sounding frazzled. "I heard the police are looking for me. I can't run forever. I've decided to turn myself in." He sank into a chair, relief and dread warring within him. "That's probably the best thing," he said. "They think I helped you launder money or something. You have to clear this up." She sighed. "I will. Look, I used your accounts to park some funds temporarily. I never meant to drag you down. I just needed a place to hide it. My ex threatened me if I didn't get him the money." Mark's jaw clenched. "Carla, you had no right." "I know," she interrupted. "I've made a mess. I'm going to explain everything to the police, tell them you weren't involved. You deserve that much." Anger flared in Mark, but he also recognized this might be his lifeline, the only way to avoid charges. "Just make sure you do the right thing." Her voice trembled. "I will. I truly did care for you, Mark, in my own selfish way." Before he could respond, she hung up, leaving Mark in stunned silence. He called his lawyer immediately, who advised him to wait for Carla's statement and remain cooperative. That night, Mark received another call, this time from Detective Carter. Carla had turned herself in, and she had indeed explained that Mark was clueless about the fraudulent aspect of her finances. The detective's tone was neutral, but Mark sensed a hint of relief. "You're free from suspicion for now, Mr. Anderson," Carter said. "But we'll verify her statement. If there's any discrepancy, we'll be in touch." When Mark ended the call, he exhaled a long breath of relief. The nightmare might finally be nearing an end, at least on the criminal side. But the personal damage remained gaping and raw. With Carla's arrest and her confession clearing Mark of wrongdoing, the legal nightmare finally eased. Now all Mark could focus on was repairing what truly mattered: his marriage. He reached out to Sarah repeatedly through messages and letters, begging for a chance to talk. After encouragement from Jessica, Sarah agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe. Mark arrived early, nervous and remorseful. When Sarah walked in, she looked tired but strong. They sat in silence for a moment before Mark spoke. "I know I can't undo what I did," he said, voice trembling. "But please let me prove I've changed." Sarah's eyes welled with tears. "You risked everything for what you let her into our home, into our bed." Mark reached for her hand, but she pulled back slightly. "I don't expect forgiveness overnight," he said. "Just the chance to be a good father, to be better." "I need time," Sarah whispered. "I have to think about what's best for the baby." Mark nodded. It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was a beginning. There was still pain between them, but there was also a door left ajar, just wide enough for the possibility of redemption. Mark moved into a small apartment, giving Sarah space while she stayed home preparing for the baby. He began therapy and parenting classes, determined to change. Jessica helped coordinate visits, and Sarah let Mark attend doctor appointments. At the ultrasound, they saw their daughter's face. Mark cried, overwhelmed. Sarah remained distant, but acknowledged his efforts. She appreciated his support, even if trust hadn't returned. Hints from Jessica suggested Sarah hadn't given up entirely. Still, the wounds ran deep. For now, they focused on the baby unsure of what the future held, but both still holding on just a little. When Sarah went into early labor, she called Mark in panic. He rushed her to the hospital and never left her side. For 3 tense days he stayed by her bed, helping however he could. As Sarah rested, Mark silently vowed to earn back her trust. One night, she stirred and whispered, "I hate what you did, but I see you're trying." Mark held her hand gently. "I'll do whatever it takes." Her eyes softened. "We'll see." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was hope. And for Mark, that was everything. Back home, on bed rest, Sarah allowed Mark to help during the day, though he returned to his studio apartment at night. Their conversations grew more civil, focused on Emily's future. One afternoon, Sarah suggested counseling, not to save the marriage yet, but to learn how to co-parent. Mark agreed eagerly. Sessions with Dr. Christine Lee were raw and painful. Sarah voiced her heartbreak. Mark confronted his fears and guilt. It wasn't healing overnight, but it was a beginning. Each meeting chipped away at their distance, offering a small, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, something could be rebuilt. At 9 months pregnant, Sarah went into labor. Mark was at her side through every contraction, with Jessica offering support. After hours of pain and anticipation, their daughter arrived, a healthy girl with a strong cry and a head full of dark hair. As Mark cradled Emily, Grace Anderson, tears streamed down his face. For a fleeting moment past, betrayals faded beneath the miracle of her birth. Sarah watched silently, eyes full of conflicting emotions. In that fragile peace, they shared an unspoken understanding. Mark devoted himself to fatherhood, staying up through night feedings, changing diapers, and caring for Sarah during recovery. Though still cautious, Sarah allowed him back into the home, but not her heart, not fully. The counselor advised they take things slow and focus on Emily's well-being. Carla's case concluded with her conviction. Mark was officially cleared, but the damage to his marriage endured. It took nearly a year of therapy and honest effort before Sarah was willing to try again. She laid out clear rules, complete transparency, shared accounts, no more secrets. Mark agreed without hesitation. They weren't the same couple as before, but in their brokenness, they found a way forward, anchored by love for their child and a hard-won trust. Roamed hope found its way back. Thank you for joining me on this roller coaster tale of betrayal, heartbreak, and the strenuous journey toward redemption. Life can twist us in unexpected ways, testing bonds and pushing us to the very edge of what we believe is possible. In Mark and Sarah's story, we're reminded that no matter how dark the night becomes, there's always a chance, however slim, for forgiveness, if we're willing to face our own failings and fight to make things right. Perhaps their story resonates with you, or someone you know, urging us all to recognize the fragility of trust and the power of second chances.